Welcome back to the Monocle Daily Live from Studio One. The wife of a French hostage held in Mali says she and her family are appalled at the news that there'll be no cash for a ransom. Françoise Laribe, the wife of Daniel Laribe, has said that President François Hollande's decision could change her husband's fate. But on the face of it, the French president's statement shouldn't come as a surprise. France, after all, doesn't deal with terrorists, does it?
Well, there has been an unspoken tradition for years that money does indeed change hands. So what does this mean for Monsieur Laribe and the 14 other French men, women and children who are currently being held in Africa? To tell us more, we're joined in the studio by the Franco-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani. Nabila, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I've just got the front cover of Tuesday's Le Monde in front of me. Pages 2 and 3 are devoted to this. How much of a burning issue was this in France before Monsieur Hollande decided to speak out?
Well, it clearly was a huge issue in France, especially since over recent decades, French nationals have been particularly targeted by hostage takers and have been particularly vulnerable, precisely because terrorists and terrorist organizations know that there are huge payouts available, paid by the French government. But I think the major issue behind this big story is that how state governments deal with terrorists in general, and forgetting the intricacies of France's ongoing war in Mali and the specific problems it creates, the West clearly has to be united in its strategy against terrorists, and that is not the case at the moment.
This isn't the case, but given the fact that France has been paying the hostage takers. To what degree domestically will François Hollande be seen to have blood on his hands if something terrible happens to any of these men and women?
I think what Hollande is effectively saying is that there is no way that he can tell the families of the hostages involved that he will throw money at the crisis. And my honest view is that the French government will continue to negotiate and indeed to pay money when they consider it that it is a pragmatic thing to do. But it just won't. We won't hear much about it. I think that's the main difference that will happen effectively. And remember, there are an awful lot of countries that officially do not even negotiate with terrorists, let alone offer them money. But what has been clear in the past is that the West has had underhand strategies toward freeing hostages. They had, in some cases, thought nothing of paying ransoms while pretending that no money was exchanged at all. So I think that's the dynamic of terrorist activity, to clearly get as much money as possible to continue funding their activities. But Hollande is now publicly reacting to that.
As you suggest there's always an awful lot of convenient hypocrisy attending this area, this interaction between governments and terrorist groups. All governments routinely say we don't deal with terrorists, we don't negotiate with terrorists, and it almost invariably turns out that they have been all along. Famously in Britain, the British government for decades claimed it wasn't negotiating with the IRA, whereas the reality was that throughout the entirety of the Troubles there was always some contact going on. Why has François Hollande chosen right here and right now to alter this policy and take this stand?
Well, I think it is very much to do with the quagmire in Mali at the moment and the recent failures of securing hostages. More recently, in 2011, 2010, French military interventions have been aimed at freeing hostages, and they have ended up in failures and indeed in disasters. But there are other ways of getting around negotiating with terrorists. For example, in 2009, in order to release a French hostage, the French actually helped capture the Islamists involved. They went through a brief trial, but they then had been released straight away by the Malian government where the crisis happened. But there's no doubt that there are two completely different positions that in France at the moment the victims of the families have, and that the François Hollande is and François Hollande's position effectively. The victims' families simply want their relatives to come home, and they often view that rescue through military operations can be ineffective, while François Hollande has to think about the worldwide implications of terrorism. It's a dirty, nasty, underhand game, and by definition, there are no set rules for playing it, and that's what the war on terror is all about. So money is certainly not an issue for governments, but the issue is national security and the fight against terrorism.
When you say money isn't an issue for governments, I recall a couple of years ago when a British couple were held hostage by Somali pirates, and they were released after a very, very long time, during which time the British government said, we don't pay hostage takers, don't pay hostage takers. And it turned out that private money, by all accounts, was what effectively secured their freedom. What do you think might happen now as a result of François Hollande making a public declaration of this sort, when for so long the French hostage has always been seen as the great prize because I'll get some cash for it?
Well, I think one of the reasons why France as a country, as a government, is known for paying out more than any other countries is that because other countries do it more secretly than the French, for a start. But it's also, I think François Hollande's decisions in the future will be based on pragmatism. Remember, 1 week before the French intervention in Mali, we heard François Hollande saying that he was pulling out of African affairs and indeed withdrawing French troops already stationed in African countries. And he did the exact opposite out of what he viewed as utter pragmatism to fight the rise of Islamic militancy in Africa. So I reckon that his future decisions will be based equally on pragmatism. And I think there's a myth now that because we live in a communication age and we're supposed to know everything instantly. But in reality, decision-making still involves an awful lot of secrecy. And that's why we still have, the 30-year or now been reduced to 20-year rule about government papers being kept secret for such a long period of time. And you can't expect governments to tell the world about their strategy, especially when it involved fighting their enemies or when lives are at risk.